Imagine you're a business owner relying on a dozen different software programs, each one disconnected, more expensive, and more complicated than the last. It can be incredibly stressful, right? Now, picture Odoo. Odoo brings all the tools your business needs into one simple platform. CRM, accounting, inventory, manufacturing, marketing, HR, and more. All seamlessly connected. Everything works together, giving you the peace of mind that your business is running smoothly from every angle. Odoo's open source applications are user-friendly and designed to scale with your business, saving you time and money. Say goodbye to juggling multiple platforms and hello to efficient, integrated management. Stop wasting resources on complicated systems and make the switch to Odoo today. Visit odoo.com, ODOO.com, and discover how Odoo can simplify and streamline your business operations. Odoo, modern management made simple.
Hello and welcome to the Washington Times Politically Unstable. I'm Kelly Sadler, the commentary editor at the Washington Times. And today I am joined by Dalia Ziada. She is the senior fellow at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. Thank you so much, Dalia, for joining us today. You're also an Egyptian scholar. What we're seeing in the Middle East is there's unrest. You have Israel still trying to finish off the job with Hamas. What happens to the Gaza Strip, what happens to the Palestinians is still an open question. There was talks today that Israel's counteroffensive into Lebanon is ending, that they've found peace with Hezbollah, not found peace, but basically are ending that front of the war. However, the situation with Hamas is still dire. There's still hostages that Hamas has, and it has not released. IDF troops, reservists were all kind of pulled in for the final countermeasure to rid Israel of Hamas. Could you speak from your perspective what you think the biggest questions are moving forward, and ultimately, how do we find peace and security in the Middle East, especially Israel, that's surrounded by neighbors that want to wipe them off the face of the map?
Wow, actually, it's a very hard question. How can we find peace in the Middle East? It's a question politicians and scholars and everyone has been trying to answer for so many years, but it seems that only recently Israel started to take actual steps to give a practical answer, a real answer, an on-the-ground answer to this important question. And the first step toward achieving that was the big success that Israel achieved against Iran and its militia over the past 2 years. We are now witnessing a new Middle East in the making, a Middle East where Israel is a key regional player. It's not anymore the tiny state defending itself and so overwhelmed by terrorist organizations targeting it from every side. This is a great progress for the region, but at the same time, it's creating a new type of conflict, a new pattern of conflict, and the new types of tensions that we have to be aware of. So the new type of conflict that this new dynamic is creating is that it's turning the geopolitical conflicts in the region into giving it some kind of a religious dimension. As right now we are seeing the rise of the Sunni axis in the region versus the fall or collapse or slow collapse of the Shia axis is creating a new dynamic that is making Sunni countries take perhaps, I'm especially speaking about the Sunni leading Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, for example, taking some steps that we can describe as unwise or immature, like, for example, supporting a jihadist regime in Syria against its own people, a jihadist regime that is committing ethnic cleansing against religious minorities in Syria. So this is very concerning. And the new pattern of tensions we have to pay attention to is that there is a growing feeling among Arab countries right now that there is a new power rising in the region, which is Israel. For them, always Israel has been seen as an enemy, and in best cases, it's a country they are obliged to have cold peace with, like the case is for Egypt and Jordan, for example, because they are security and economically are interdependent on Israel. So they had to have cold peace agreements with. So now, no, this is not the case anymore. Israel is an agenda setter. It's going to set the agenda for the future of it's already right now as we speak, is setting the agenda for the future of the Middle East, which is something disturbing leading Arab countries, especially the new leaders of the Arab world like Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries.
Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit for our readers and viewers that don't have the historical context between, you've got Israel, which is a democracy in the Middle East, the only democracy in the Middle East, and it's surrounded by a group of Arab countries. Now, President Trump made headway in terms of stabilizing the Middle East through the Abraham Accords. Saudi Arabia have not joined the Abraham Accords, which would allow commerce between these countries that typically were enemies. And he gave a speech in Saudi Arabia, President Trump did earlier this year, which basically said, together we can prosper and flourish together, or don't join the coalition and you'll be on the outskirts. And he was very pointed to Iran. Iran either do the right thing or continue to badger, and hell and fury will come to you. And it essentially did, Israel first, and then with the U.S. B-2 bombers going in and blowing up their nuclear facilities. The Sunnis and the Shias, why is there tension? You'd think Arab countries would be united against Israel, a Jewish country. You understand that, but could you describe a little bit more conflict within, these traditionally Muslim countries?
Yeah, this is a very good question, but I will divide it into two parts. The first part is about what I like to call the three layers of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict started like any other conflict in the world as a territorial conflict. It's a conflict over a piece of land. Two groups of people are fighting over who owns this land and who has the right to exist on this land. We saw these conflicts happening everywhere in the world without them taking this huge size that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has taken over years. However, two more layers were added over time that complicated this conflict and turned it into first a regional conflict. This was exactly at the time of the birth of Pan-Arabism by Gamal Abdel Nasser, an Egyptian president who was very a fascist president who came with a communist idea and wanted to find a common enemy to unite the Arab around in order to fight. And it was the easiest enemy he could find was Israel. And since then, he labeled Israel as an agent to Western imperialism, which is a term, unfortunately, the Free Palestine movement in Western countries right now is using, and they know very well that when they use this particular term, they are not only targeting Israel in the Middle East or speaking about a humanitarian situation in Gaza, they are actually targeting the Western civilization, which is a very crucial point that I will get to when we speak about the Muslim side of the conflict. So this is one thing. The third layer was built in after 1979, around the 1980s, after the success of the Islamic Revolution in hijacking Iran, and then inspiring other radical Islamist groups like the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt also to follow suit with what the Islamic Revolution has done. And they also needed a cause to mobilize people around. What was the easiest cause? it is a so-called Palestinian cause. And I say so-called because it has different meanings to different people. While people like us may think of it as about giving a Palestinian state to the Palestinian people, or giving them the right to rule themselves, or a better future. No, for the Palestinian people and the majority of Arabs, the Palestinian cause is not about building a Palestinian state. It's about destroying the Israeli state. So this is at this moment when the conflict was put in the hands of the Islamists or abused by the Islamists, the third layer was built, which is the Muslim-Jewish conflict layer. This explains now why there are people who are outside the Middle East. They've never been in wars, in direct wars with Israel at least, and they hate Israel so much. They practice anti-Semitism in broad daylight and they are even proud of themselves while doing it. And they do it in Western countries. Why? It's simply because of this third layer that was added to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict by radical Islamists. And this takes us to the bigger problem, in my opinion, and it's not only in the Middle East, is of who controls the Islamic rhetoric in the world. Everywhere you look, either the Islamic political rhetoric that has to do with the conflicts happening in the region with majority Muslim countries, which is the Middle East, or on the international level, those who are controlling the rhetoric are radical Islamists, political Islamist groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, which is, by the way, the parent organization of Hamas, the terrorist organization Hamas. And this rhetoric is very dangerous because if we look at their literature, see, for example, the work of Yusuf al-Qaradawi, one of the main ideologues, the modern ideologues of the Muslim Brotherhood. He died only a couple of years ago, and he was based in Doha, Qatar. Well, no surprise. He made several fatwas and made several teachings to his followers living in Western countries about how to use the Palestinian cause, or as he calls it, Palestine, as a glue to cement Muslim communities in Western countries together, and also gain support and sympathy from non-Muslims in these Western communities, similar to what we are seeing now in the form of the sinful marriage between radical Islamists and radical left in the West around the idea of free Palestine that they are using as a justification to kill, to practice anti-Semitism, and even literally kill, and practice anti-Semitism in Western countries, and also get out or expose project publicly speaking about their hatred to the Western civilization, which is one of the goals of the Muslim Brotherhood, to destroy in order to build their own caliphate system.
Okay, so that's a lot. Just kind of breaking it down, and I do understand that the Palestinian cause has been hijacked in terms of propaganda and a way to unite the Arab countries against Israel. But you're seeing that disintegrate a little bit. The fact that Saudi Arabia is considering joining the Abraham Accords, that the offense against Iran was always considered kind of the head of the snake, the one that's been funding all of these radical offshoots like Hezbollah, like Hamas. You rarely hear about the Muslim Brotherhood, but clearly Egypt and Jordan and the surrounding, Muslim countries are going to need to help repair, rebuild, shelter some of these Palestinians as Israel or the U.S. or help them even rebuild the Gaza Strip because it's been totally decimated. So I suppose my question is, moving forward, what roles does Egypt play? What roles does Jordan play? What roles will Saudi Arabia play after Israel defeats Hamas, because Israel will defeat Hamas. And Iran right now is in a weakened state, the weakest it's ever been in my lifetime.
Unfortunately, what they're doing is too little compared to all the loves they are singing to the Gazan people, or even to their pragmatic relationships with Israel. But let me start first by going one step back to the Abraham Accords, because it's very, very crucial. It really brought a lot of hope to all of us in the region. At one moment, we believed that finally the region is really coming to peace in the year 2020 when the Abraham Accords were signed. Why? Because it was the first real peace agreements to be signed in the region and to be followed upon by the countries that signed it. It was real peace, warm peace that included economic relations, cultural exchange, social integration between the Arab countries and Israel at that time who did this, and also political integration. So it was real. And why it succeeded, why it was, for example, different from the peace treaties that were signed in the 1980s and 1979 with Egypt and Jordan and so, simply because the Gulf countries that signed it are pragmatic countries. They care for their economy, for their wealth, for their economic power. They don't want to lose it, so they are already willing to do anything possible to achieve peace in the region in order to keep their wealth and their power. In contrast, the other Arab countries like Egypt, Jordan, and so, unfortunately, their strength comes from kind of keeping the troubles in the region going on and being heated and heightened. Why? Because it gives them leverage as regional leaders. It keeps their name in the news. Take, for example, Egypt. You just asked a very good question. Where is Egypt from all what is happening? Why Egypt is not taking any actions to save the people in Gaza? Unfortunately, for Egypt, Gaza is nothing more than a business. It's a project they fundraise for, they profit from, it keeps their name in the news, but it's not anything more than that. They are not willing to take any responsibility towards the people in Gaza more than that. All the people around the world today are blaming Israel for the war. Yes, look, let's agree it's a war. It's ugly. War is ugly. Any war in the world is ugly, and people die in wars. That's why I pray every day this war comes to an end. But we have to do this with an open eye. We have to understand why there is a very high death toll in Gaza. It's not because there is a war. It is because their so-called government, Hamas, the same terrorist organization that committed the terrorist crime of October 7, the massacre against the Israeli people, it is the same organization that is purposefully exposing the people in Gaza to the horrors of war so they can die in large numbers and thus use their blood, as Haniyeh publicly said. They don't hide it. Haniyeh, he was a political leader of Hamas before he was assassinated last year. He came out and said, we want more and more blood in Gaza, more and more blood of the children and women in Gaza to be fuel for our movement. He said that. So this is the reason why there is a very high death toll. Another party to be blamed is actually my home country, Egypt. I expected Egypt at least to open the border for the Gazans to be able to run from the war, to escape the war, to get into Egypt as refugee at least temporarily until Israel deals with Hamas, gets the hostages out, and ends this war. But unfortunately, Egypt did not do that. What Egypt did is that it doubled the wall in the border between Gaza and Sinai to prevent any Gazans from getting into Sinai, even for medical aid.
So where do we go from here? Because, I've talked to some military analysts who anticipate that the IDF, by the end of September, will have eliminated Hamas. It's an aggressive timeline, but it's something that it's achievable. What happens to the Palestinians, what happens to Gaza, and where do, what role? I feel as though Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, they're all going to have to play a role in the region to both house these refugees, basically, who can't return to their homes in the Gaza Strip, as well as economically help rebuild this war-torn area.
Yeah, we are now speaking about what we call the day after in Gaza, which people has been speaking about since the very first days of the war, prematurely, actually. So in order, what is the next step? What needs to happen next? So now we are having Israel on the ground dealing with Hamas. And hopefully, as you said, I pray this will really, really happen, that by the end of September, we are done with Hamas. No more Hamas in Gaza. And for Israel to succeed in this mission, two parties need to shut their mouths at least for this period of time, at least for the coming 2 or 3 months. One of them are, with all due respect, the European leaders who are jumping the gun, and they want to declare a Palestinian statehood at a time when, if they do this, they will be actually kind of throwing a lifeline to Hamas and rewarding terrorism and legitimizing it. And not only terrorism in the Middle East, they will be also legitimizing terrorism in their own country. So this is the first step. The second party that needs to shut their mouths down for a while are also, with all due respect, the Arab leaders. They did nothing to this war. They did nothing for the good of the region for so long. And Israel is on the forefront of this war on behalf of all the Arabs. They need to understand that on behalf of all of us, for our security. So they need to shut their mouths for a while. Enough with criticism, enough with false accusations of genocide, ethnic cleansing, and so. I advise them to get busy actually with other more pressing problems in Sudan, where there is a famine killing over 500,000 children, that killed over 500,000 children over the past year, and an ethnic cleansing practiced by a terrorist regime in Syria that's killing its own people for nothing other than being members of other religions. As simple as that. So they should get busy with that, not with what Israel is doing, as long as they cannot help at this point. The next step, or the second level, hopefully after Israel finishes Hamas, Arab countries need to step in. And they need to step in coordination and cooperation with Israel, not with any other party, not with the Palestinian Authority, not with isolating Israel. They need to step in coordination and cooperation with Israel in order to build a new government in Gaza. Right now, there are talks about a technocratic government that Egypt is proposing. In Egypt and Turkey are working together on putting some names about potential people, including businessmen from Gaza, young people, and technocratic professionals who can form a council that can lead Gaza for a certain period of time, let's say 5 years or so, until the reconstruction process happens, like physical reconstruction, rebuilding the homes and rebuilding the city once again. So for this to happen, Arab countries need to coordinate with Israel, practicing restraint toward Israel, trying to please the domestic audience in their countries by rhetorical speech, by rhetorical hatred toward Israel, and so has to stop. It's time for cooperation if they really want a real solution in Gaza. And while actually doing this, I believe Qatar should not be part of this, because actually what Qatar has been doing since day one of this war was making sure that Hamas remains in power, remains protected under the claims of, international law or whatever, all the accusations, all the justifications they are using, which are not true. Qatar has to be sidelined for a while for the good of the region. They have to be sidelined, and moderate countries that already has a history of relationship with Israel, like the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Jordan, and also Saudi Arabia, which is now we call the big sister of Arabs and the most powerful country in the Arab world right now. need to coordinate with Israel on how the next steps should be. If we follow this plan, I think within a time frame of 5 years to 10 years maximum, we will be seeing a whole new Gaza, a whole new city that really respects its own people, is not a hotspot for terrorism anymore that threatens all its neighbors, not only Israel, but also Egypt and other neighbors in the Arab world or in the region, including in the Eastern Mediterranean. So if this happens, we will see a whole new Gaza and a whole new Middle East.
Dalia, I hope what you're saying and the kind of the vision that you've laid out is achieved in the region. I think we all do. I wanted to ask you more of a personal question. You're clearly Muslim. You're very enlightened when it comes to kind of some of the geopolitical realities within the Middle East right now, and very tolerant of the Jewish state, of the state of Israel, where we haven't always seen that from other Muslim nations. How did you get to where you are and develop the perspective that you have?
Actually, the key word is education. I was like all other Egyptians. I grew up in Cairo, believing, being indoctrinated by our school text box, by our media, even in our mosque. I grew up with this process of indoctrination that told me that Israel is our historical enemy. The Jewish people are so evil. They eat babies on breakfast with ketchup on, So I grew up with all these ideas in my mind until actually a major event happened in my life when I was 18 years old. It was the time of the Second Intifada. And at that time, I was a freshman student, or a fresh woman, as I like to call it, in a university in Cairo. And there were protests, of course, on my campus in support of Gaza and against Israel. And so very similar to what we are seeing at American campuses today. And I was joining the protests just like all the other students, very, very naively and very ignorant about what they are even talking about. But it's a trendy thing on campus. Until in one day, about 2 months after these protests started, the people organizing the protest, and they are later on, I learned, are the Muslim Brotherhood. They wanted to make a show by burning flags. So they started by burning the Israeli flag, which, made sense because the protest is against Israel anyway. And then they burned the American flag. And I remember at that time, I was like, America exists thousands of miles away. Why it has to do with anything here? And then the third flag they burned was the Egyptian flag. And this, for me, was so shocking. It was a moment that created a cognitive dissonance in my mind that something is wrong here. These people cannot be good people and at the same time burn my flag. Something's wrong. And why they are burning it for another place that's called Gaza? Why should I care, So it was literally the moment I took a step back and I popped out of the ideological box I was stuck into my whole life. And I decided to simply go and educate myself about Israel, about Judaism, about Islam, about Islamism, about the geopolitics of the Middle East. And within 1 year of education, self-education, actually, that I was very keen to learn, I lost a lot of friends, but also I became a different person. I became someone who understood that Israel is simply defending itself against, I'm sorry to say, a bunch of evil neighbors who just want to destroy it for nothing other than being a Jewish state, which is not acceptable. This is not how our world should be. So since then, I became an advocate for Muslim-Jewish dialogue and Arab-Israeli dialogue. And actually, I'm always proud to say that I was one of only 3 voices in Egypt, in over 100 million people in Egypt who publicly condemned Hamas terrorism after October 7. And it was not easy. Of course, I received a horrible backlash that forced me eventually to leave my country. But when I came here and saw that actually the same evil people I ran from in my home country exist here, I took on myself the mission to continue the fight and continue educating people as much as I can about the reality of the Middle East, the real Middle East that I know, that I lived in my whole life.
Well, Dalia, thank you so much for your work and for your advocacy and for your voice. It's been a pleasure speaking with you this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me and amplifying my voice. Thank you.